just moved to Miami. I love it here. It's I'm getting used to the heat, but I grew up in Orange County, California. 23 years old, about to be 24. And what can I say? I too have learned my lesson from the overlords at YouTube. I now understand that Zelensky's a very good, honorable man. Nina Agdal is an honorable woman, and she did nothing wrong. And I'm just happy to be here, you know?
Wise man. Very wise man.
Oh, man. And don't worry, guys. You're going to get the real raw on Rumble when we switch over there. But so tell us a little bit about yourself, man. So you said you're from Orange County, California. What was that like growing up over there, bro?
It's my foundation that I think, you know, as you get older and older, you begin to come back to who you were as a kid. And, you know, I went through a stage of my life where I was definitely like liberal, lefty, whatever. I was doing like a lot of weed and smoking and drinking a lot. Mm-hmm. Definitely not a good part of my life. I wasn't working out. And through the good grace of God, you know, people like you, people like Tate, whoever, you know, they've really uplifted a generation of men again who were just manipulated and propagandized with all this liberal nonsense. And you see it. You see what it's doing to our country. It's really sick. They tell you it's liberalism. They're going to give you freedom and whatnot, but it gives you freedom from God, freedom from family, freedom from tradition and your nation. And so Orange County is a very patriotic place. It's very conservative, great weather. It's you know, I had a great high school. I can't say anything bad about it. I had an awesome family.
It's right outside of LA, right?
Yeah, it's about hour south of LA.
So. Yeah.
Far enough south where there's no tweakers or crack addicts on the street. And
fantastic.
Yeah. No, it's very nice. But anyways, I surfed a lot, played basketball, did track all throughout high school, and was really into sports. And then got a little bit older, didn't go to college, and I ran for mayor in my hometown. And I ran
for mayor.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I ran when I was 18, I lost, and then I ran when I was 19 again, and I got really close. And I honestly am thankful that I lost because it set me on the trajectory to where I am now. I started a YouTube channel where I focus on foreign policy and war. And even as, you know, a lefty, I supported Bernie Sanders, and I thought to myself, well, Bernie Sanders is calling out the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war.
Yeah.
He's calling out what's going on in Syria, for example, to a certain extent. Called out other things that we're not going to mention here. But it's so sad because all these people who were once at least somewhat good on issues and matters of foreign policy, they're now just becoming tools and the apparatus of the deep state. I saw Bernie Sanders this week. He was criticizing Cornel West, who's running as a Green Party candidate. It's like, who cares about that?
What is a Green Party?
Yeah, exactly. So he's just towing the DNC line. And anyway, so
he's not running again, right?
No. But long story short, I through my YouTube show, I think I just slowly but surely arrived at a position where, I mean, you can't look at the world in any other place but understand that in America, what we really need right now is God. We need traditional values. We need to have anti-war candidates. I think Trump is that man for 2024 who are going to be on the ballot. And we need to have peace, and we don't have a lot of that right now. We have a bunch of warmongers, and we have a bunch of people pushing things that I think are ultimately bad for humanity.
Yeah.
Well said. I'm just curious, because you mentioned you were liberal before. What was the breaking point for you to turn to conservative?
That might be a Rumble conversation.
Okay.
But you know, there's a lot of insanity in the world, saying that the sky's not blue, saying that, you know, up is down and left is right. And whatever you're looking at, whether it's our cultural views or whether it's the war and stuff like that, you know, it's so bad now that if you simply call into question what they're doing on the mainstream media, they'll never have you back on again. If you call it into question on YouTube, they'll do what they did to you guys and what they've done to me over a year ago now. They permanently demonetized my account. They banned me twice on YouTube. They banned me 3 times on Twitter, 1 time under Elon, so 4 times in total. They banned me permanently on Twitch. They banned me from PayPal. They banned me from Venmo. They banned me from multiple merchandise stores. They banned me from everywhere just because of what I have to say about this new multipolar world that's coming into order and what's happening with Russia, what's happening with China, what's happening even with Saudi Arabia right now, what's happening with these wars and how we need to push for a peace deal. And
Isn't that crazy that you push for peace and they're just like, oh yeah, take his PayPal away?
Yeah.
Like
That's wild.
Yeah.
But what is it? The agenda doesn't want that. They want it to go through. So
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue. You were saying.
No, I mean, it's crazy. And at the core of it all is communism, because I'm a communist. I'm a MAGA communist, and MAGA is the heart and soil of our country. I mean, if you really think about it, MAGA isn't even, a puppet of Donald Trump. When Donald Trump started talking about, the jabs and whatnot, MAGA was pushing back on him. If Donald Trump came out tomorrow and started saying positive things about Zelensky, I think MAGA would push back on him. And at its core, MAGA is a partisan movement that is pushing for the interests of the working man. The working man in America doesn't need more war, doesn't need, BlackRock and Vanguard buying up more shares of Comcast. It doesn't need, our industry being outsourced to China or Taiwan or Indonesia or wherever. The working man in America would benefit greatly if we followed an integrated path of economic cohesion like we see in China, for example, or the foundation of Russia, centralization of our public commodities like oil, natural gas. Every person needs oil, every person needs natural gas, every person needs food and the fertilizer that makes it. But right now we have this rich horde of elites that are hoarding all of our resources away from the working people and preventing our country from actually prospering and developing like we're seeing in China right now, which lifted 840 million people out of poverty in the last 40 years. So we're going backwards.
Yeah.
It's very bad.
There's been a lot of talk, and you've talked about this as well, with BRICS and, challenging the reserve currency status of the United States, right? I guess first, right, because it's been a while since we've talked about reserve currency and petrodollar and everything else. Can you explain to people what the reserve currency status means, and then how BRICS is going to challenge that and what you predict is going to happen?
Well, right now, so since the 70s when Nixon was in power, they decoupled the dollar from gold. I don't necessarily blame Nixon for that. I think it was scoundrels within his administration who convinced him to do that. It was a terrible decision. And since then, the petrodollar has been the single global reserve currency. So all these other currencies across the world, if they're having problems, if they're having maybe these wealthy elites, City of London, Wall Street, they're taking advantage of inflation or deflation. They're speculating on a given country's currency and making millions and millions and millions or billions of dollars off of it in the process. For example, George Soros made his money by initially, I think he shorted the British pound. I think that's how he initially made his money. So
before, when the British pound was still the reserve currency of the world?
No, but when the dollar's the reserve currency, you can manipulate markets in different currencies all across the world. So that's how he made his initial money.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it was a big international dilemma. There's a really good book Matt Palumbo wrote, "The Man Behind the Curtain." It's a book about George Soros, and he talks all about that in the book. But when you start to look at that stuff and you start to see what's happening in Africa, you start to see what's happened in all these Eastern and Central Asian nations for so long, and you understand that their people are suffering, but Africa is the richest country or richest continent on the face of the earth when it comes to raw minerals and resources. But what's happening? You have their currencies that are destroyed by these international elites, City of London, Wall Street. And after they do that, they go in and steal their uranium, steal their gold, steal their silver, steal their oil, steal their natural gas, sell it on international markets for pennies on the dollar. And that's what's happened for years. And for the first time now with BRICS and with these uprisings we're seeing in Africa and with other geopolitical events that we'll talk about on Rumble, it's changing that international order where the U.S. and Britain have been able to utilize the dollar as a tool of physical force on the rest of the world.
Gotcha. And BRICS, the countries that are in it right now, because I know there's it's Brazil, the R is Russia, India, China, and then South Africa, if I'm not mistaken, is the S. But there's been other countries that have been trying to get into it as well, right?
Yeah, so there was just a BRICS summit in South Africa last week. And so in addition to Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they now have Egypt, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and Iran. And there's one more I'm missing off the top of my head. I always forget one. But they brought in a bunch of new countries, and now they have out of the top 10 oil-producing nations on the face of the planet, they have 7, which are now BRICS member states. Only 2 of the top 10 are G7 states. It's the U.S. and Canada. And then I think the other one is Iraq, and they lean towards BRICS. They'll probably eventually be brought into BRICS. But they control most of the world's oil. They control, I think like 40+% of the world's GDP now, and it's only going to continue to grow. There was like 20 more countries that were very upset they weren't brought into the BRICS grouping during this most recent summit in Johannesburg. And it's just, I laugh and I say it's poetic justice, because what has the U.S. done and what has Britain done for years and years and years? If they don't like Bashar al-Assad, they sanction him, they sanction his family, they sanction his administration and everyone in Syria. They prevent food and medical resources from entering the country. They did that in Venezuela. They did that in Syria. They did that in Russia. We all know. They've done it everywhere. And for the first time now, we're beginning to see the ramifications of those policies biting them in the butt, because all these countries got together and they said, well, if I have a border dispute that the United States doesn't agree with us on, they're going to sanction us and utilize the dollar against us, maybe utilize war against us. If I have a water dispute with India that the United States doesn't agree with us on, they're going to do the same thing. So why don't we, instead of trying to work with the United States, Wall Street, and the City of London, let's all band together and just form a new world. And they're going to be doing that. They're going to be creating this new currency to challenge the dollar. It's going to be backed by a commodity of, basket commodity of like resources like oil, gas, maybe fertilizer. Who knows what we'll see. And it's going to eventually win. I mean, there's no easy answer to going back now in the state that our country's in. So
what does that mean for America itself? The people.
Probably, the worst poverty we're going to have ever seen in our country. If not, the worst poverty we're going to have seen in a very long time. It's not a pretty picture, and already we're beginning to see the impacts of this just on a small microcosm. Look at what happened in Europe last year. So they got this great idea that they were going to sanction Russia, and it was going to bring down the Russian economy, and Putin was going to fall to power. Then they were going to balkanize Russia, tear it into a bunch of small countries, whatever. But what happened? They sanctioned Russia. Russia said, okay, we'll sell our oil to India. We'll sell our oil to China, of course, to whoever needs it or wants it. And if you don't want to buy it, if you don't want to buy our LNG, then sure, And then they, of course, the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline as well. And
allegedly. Allegedly. Hey man, we on YouTube.
All right.
Radek Sikorski's admitted to that. He was a member of the European Parliament, so I think that's a fair point to make. But anyways, allegedly. So now they're left without LNG. What do we do? Okay, so they built up their their natural gas reserves last winter. It was a pretty seasonably warm winter in Europe, so they weren't too strapped for energy without Russia. But still, despite the fact that they had built up all the reserves, because they didn't have an easy access of liquefied natural gas from Russia, and because it was so expensive to build up their reserves, they spent billions and billions and billions of dollars to build up their reserves from all these random countries across the world they had to source it from instead of Russia, which was cheap and efficient. Because of how expensive gas was all across Europe, the economists predicted that 150,000 people died due to a lack of energy in Europe last winter alone, which is actually, and they reported this, and these are official, CDC numbers, that's more deaths from a lack of energy than official CDC deaths in Europe during the same time span from COVID in the same time period last winter.
Oh, wow.
So it's a big deal, and that was nothing. No one talked about it. Imagine how bad it's going to get when things really start to change.
Cold winter, yeah.
Yeah, maybe this winter.
Question for you. You mentioned that obviously the U.S. reserve currency status is propped up through Saudi Arabia and oil, and the deal that Nixon struck back in the 70s. Saudi Arabia isn't so happy with us right now. What do you see going with that, since the reserve currency status is so contingent upon oil that comes from Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, we've always had a bit of a fraught good relationship, but it's, had its problems with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Over issues we can't talk about here. But, Saudi Arabia is it's so interesting because I think they've had it too. They see what's happening with Joe Biden. I think they look at Joe Biden and they see a clown in the White House. And they've also seen how the world is shifting. The power centers are shifting to Russia and China. China is going to surpass our economy very soon. Russia's actually moving up. Russia, for the first time in the past 14 years, they're now one of the top 10 economies in the world. In terms of purchasing power parity, they're the 5th largest economy in the world. They passed Germany and the UK and France this year. So Russia's doing better than in a number of years. China's doing better than ever before. And the United States, however, we lost 1 million millionaires last year. 1 million millionaires we lost. Russia went up $600 billion in wealth. As a whole, the U.S. lost $5.9 trillion.
What's your... Sorry, I wanted you to finish your thought before I ask the question.
All I got to say is, I mean, the writing's on the wall. Saudi Arabia sees what's happening.
Yeah.
They know where the money's going to be coming from next. It's not going to be coming from the U.S., which is in economic decline. It's slow right now, but everyone sees what's on the horizon.
And they're trying to go electric and all this other crap. So, yeah, understand.
Follow the money.
Or, yeah. Well,
Tesla.
Yeah, I mean, they still so they're going electric, but look at all the billions all the propaganda they push about renewable energy, right?
Yeah,
it's not renewable. We all know that it's extremely detrimentous to the environment and
expensive.
It's expensive and it's
those windmills don't do shit.
It's low efficiency.
Yeah,
fossil fuels are highly efficient, low cost, but the real answer is nuclear fusion. I think that we need nuclear fusion everywhere across the world. Right now, of course, just building more fission reactors. But Saudi Arabia, they just contracted China after they accepted Saudi Arabia into the BRICS grouping. They just contracted China to build, I think it was like a multi-billion-dollar nuclear power plant, something to that effect, a huge undertaking. Iran also just contracted China to build a $2.7 billion airport, and that's being paid for in oil.